His eyes nearly popped out of his head, and he leaped off the bench like a jackrabbit. "There's no Jin-Woo sung," he blurted. The news spread like wildfire, racing across the internet and TV screens. South Korea and Japan were joining forces to tackle some crazy monsters that had turned Jeju Island, a super cool vacation spot, into a wasteland. What could possibly grab Koreans' attention more than this? Every newspaper front page and TV channel buzzed with the story of this unlikely team-up. Yet, oddly enough, it seemed only Koreans were totally stoked about it. Even though Japan sent way more hunters, 3 times as many as Korea, the Japanese media was weirdly quiet about it. Korea didn't seem to notice that no one was talking about this. When a few articles did come out, people online weren't happy. Some even said stuff like, "What do we have to do with this mess?" Or "Why is it our problem?" Others complained, saying things like, "They already paid for any damage, right? And the Japanese Hunters Association is useless. And those Korean hunters are being super irresponsible." The time to leave Jeju was getting closer every day. But the 2 countries involved in the mission had very different reasons for being there. For Jin-Woo, though, these few days turned out to be some of the happiest he'd had since his mom got sick. A lot had changed recently. First off, Jin-Woo had brought Kanjui back to his place, after she was released from the hospital. When they walked into his apartment, they were greeted by a huge mess in the living room, courtesy of Gina, who'd apparently been up to some mischief, while Jin-Woo was busy with his whole Demon's Castle situation. Jin-Woo groaned, shaking his head as he playfully pinched Gina's cheek. Kanjui laughed and scolded him at the same time, trying to make light of the chaos around them. After 4 long years, you'd think she'd do something big first thing back. But nope, she decided to give the apartment a good cleaning. Jin-Woo tried to talk her out of it. But once she got going, the kids rolled up their sleeves too. Their faces lit up with pride. As the place started sparkling, the windows shone, and even the floors looked brand new. It had felt kinda empty without their mom. But now, it felt cozy again. For the first time in forever, Jin-Woo slept like a rock, feeling like everything was finally back to normal like home. When he woke up the next morning and saw breakfast waiting on the table, it hit him. His mom was finally home. Pyeonchae, who was busy chopping green onions in the kitchen, turned around with a smile. "Sleep well, sweetie?" she asked. He nodded, still half asleep, mumbling, "Yeah, I did. It's on TV." An expert was talking about the strange situation unfolding. "These magic beast ants are changing faster than anyone expected," the expert explained. A hyper-excited guest sitting next to them blurted out a question. "Wait, can magic beasts actually evolve?" "Wasn't that ant they found in Japan just because of some genetic mutation?" "You're right," someone replied. "When these changed ants start taking over the whole group, that's what we call evolution." Then a video popped up on the screen. It showed footage of the ants from 2 different missions to wipe them out. The first time they were crawling around like normal ants on the ground. But during the second mission, some of them had changed, climbing up walls and acting way smarter than before. Basically, these creatures were super-sized ants. But then something strange happened. As one scientist noted, this is footage of the ants from the 3rd mission. What they saw was shocking. The ants were now standing upright on 2 legs, just like humans. Their massive heads had gotten smaller, and they were way more nimble. They even used their other 4 legs like hands. It was as if these creatures had transformed into something halfway between a human and an ant-bizarre, but fascinating hybrid. In just 2 years, this species went through some big changes. And here's the magic beast that caused huge damage in Japan, someone announced. The audience gasped. Their jaws dropped as they stared at what was in front of them. Now the ant looked even more human than before, and to make things even crazier, it had grown large wings on its back. The comedian on the panel couldn't believe his eyes. "Wait, can that thing actually fly?" he asked. "Yes, it can," came the reply. This also triggered the Korea-Japan alliance. The Korea-Japan alliance, Jin-Woo muttered, turning off the TV. Truth is, he really wanted to join that extermination mission. When President Go asked him, his heart raced with excitement at the chance to level up. But that thrill didn't last long. Reality set in, and he thought things through clearly. It had only been a day since Mom woke up. He hadn't told her yet that her only son was now a hunter. Jin-Woo still remembered those sleepless months she went through when Dad disappeared inside a gate. Jin-Woo couldn't bear the thought of telling his mom he was leaving for Jeju Island. He really wanted to spend a few more days with his family. Finally, after struggling with the decision, he forced out the words, "I can't go." To him, being with his family mattered way more than anything else. This was exactly why he trained so hard. No regrets at all. But wait. Why isn't Jin-Woo Sung's name on the Korean list? Sure, he might be in S rank now. But people don't change overnight. Once in S rank, I bet he got so scared, he almost wet his pants. Lol. There were all these top Japanese hunters, 21 of them. And even a retired hunter from Korea showed up. But where was Jin-Woo Sung? Is this really how he's gonna act now? That he's an S-rank hunter? It's so embarrassing. Jin-Woo was annoyed. Because people were judging him without knowing the whole story. Jin-Woo noticed that what people said online was stressing out his sister Gina. He didn't really care what others thought. And his mom wasn't worried, because she didn't use the internet. But Gina kept an eye on stuff like that. Jin-Woo sighed, bit his lip, and set his phone down. For now, there was nothing he could do. Jin-Woo thought about going for a walk to clear his head when his phone buzzed. He smiled as he saw who was calling. "Hey, boss. It's me, Jin-Ho," his friend said excitedly. "Hey," Jin-Woo replied casually. "Have you found a place?" Jin-Woo asked, curious if Jin-Ho had finally moved out of the motel. "Or are you still at that motel?" "Oh, no. I got my own place recently. Thankfully my mom reached out." So, hearing Jin-Ho laugh for the first time in a while felt weirdly comforting. He went on and on about how he'd been doing, then suddenly remembered why he called in the first place. "By the way, boss," he said, "I found an office space. Can you come check it out?" Jin-Ho asked excitedly. What are you talking about?" Jin-Madol replied, confused. "It, the office, of course." Jin-Ho said with a grin. "We need an office space to start our guild. Boss." It, Jin-Madol shook his head, thinking, this kid, as the future vice president. Jin-Ho had big plans to create a guild that could rival famous ones like the Hunters, or White Tiger guilds. Jin-Madol scratched his chin. "He'll be surprised when I tell him I'm just gonna stick to being a solo player," he thought. Jin-Madol had casually invited Jin-Ho to join him. But now that it was time to explain his vision for the guild, Jin-Woo didn't know where to start. "So, what do you think, boss?" Jin-Ho asked hopefully. Jin-Madol could see why Jin-Ho felt so confident about this place. He nodded as he checked out the office. "It was in a great spot near my apartment. I found the best space I could around here," he said with a grin. "The place was super clean too. I wanted us to have a brand new spot because, new wine needs new bottles, right? Plus, it was huge, spacious enough for a dance party." Jin-Ho's eyes were shining with excitement. "I'm going to build a guild that's better than the top 5. Boss," he declared, sounding like he was ready to take on the world. I got why he was so pumped up. But part of me wished he'd leave me out of his big plans. Jin-Woo just stood there, silently wondering if it was too late to tell Jin-Ho to go back to Yojin Guild. Jin-Ho doubted Chairman Yu would take him back after being cut off, but he still looked surprised when Jin-Woo seemed unsure about it.
"Boss, don't you like this place?"
Jin-Ho asked, his voice tinged with concern. "It's not that," Jin-Woo replied quietly. "Then can I sign the lease, boss?" Jin-Ho pressed on, his eyes hopeful. Jin-Woo hesitated for a moment before nodding. Sure, the space was huge, and the rent would definitely be high. But compared to what the guild made, it wasn't too bad. Jin-Woo figured it was okay to let Jin-Ho have this little dream, even if they'd practically be the only ones using the office. Jin-Ho's face lit up as he clapped his hands excitedly. "Oh! Who are you gonna pick as the last person, boss?" "Us." "Last person?" Jin-Woo was puzzled because he didn't remember making any promises about hiring someone else. He usually had a good memory for these things. So Jin-Ho excitedly jumped in to explain. "When you start a guild you need at least 3 hunters." "Boss, so, did that mean they needed a president, a vice president, and 1 regular member to get started?" That seemed to be the minimum required to form a guild. Considering that an E-rank gate required at least 3 squad members to tackle, that made sense. But no guild would waste their time raiding E-rank gates. Jin-Woo thought about his acquaintances, trying to find a 3rd person. The only condition was that they had to be a hunter, preferably someone who didn't really take hunting seriously, and just wanted to help fill the quota. Why can I only think of women? Because he wondered, He pictured the high school girl who'd given up on becoming a hunter and the healer who'd moved back to Busan. Just then, Jin-Woo exclaimed, "Oh right, do you have someone in mind?" Jin-Woo asked. "No, that's not it, boss," Jin-Woo replied. "Hey Jin-Woo, someone's looking for you." Jin-Woo's eyes narrowed with interest. Who could that be, he wondered. As far as anyone knew, Jin-Woo and Jin-Woo were just a strike squad leader and his member. But clearly, whoever was asking had dug deep enough to know how to reach Jin-Woo through Jin-Woo. That was no small feat, and it piqued Jin-Woo's curiosity. Who could this mysterious person be? Jin-Woo squinted hard. "Who's looking for me?" "I'm not sure, boss," Jin-Woo replied. "It was some foreigner who spoke English." "Wait a minute." Jin-Woo dug into his pockets and pulled out his wallet. From it, he took out a small note. "He said he'll be in Korea until the 17th, so he really wants you to meet him, boss." The note had only a phone number and a hotel room number on it. Jin-Woo flipped it over, but there was nothing on the other side. The 17th is just 3 days away. Foreigner who speaks English. Who could this be? Jin-Woo's face turned serious, and he said, "I need to head back home now." Jin-Woo, who was super excited about having dinner with Jin-Woo for the first time in ages, looked really disappointed, like a sad puppy. But Jin-Woo wasn't going to change his mind. Trying not to show how upset he was, Jin-Woo quickly bowed and said, "See you later, boss." By the time he looked up, Jin-Woo was already gone. The streets were getting dark, with shadows filling every alleyway. One evening Jin-Woo was walking home from the university when her heart started racing like crazy. No way, she thought. A man was following her. She tried to calm herself down, hoping they were just headed in the same direction by coincidence. Earlier she had seen something online about this kind of situation. It seemed to be a problem for both women and men. Generally, men walk as fast as or faster than women. But if a guy tries to pass a woman too quickly, the sound of his footsteps getting closer can really scare her. If you walked behind someone in a creepy alley with flickering streetlights, people might get suspicious. Jimin glanced over her shoulder and noticed a man wearing a hat walking quietly behind her. He kept his head low, which made him look shady. But just because someone wears a hat doesn't mean they're up to something. Still, there was something about him that didn't feel right. Jimin had been walking awkwardly next to this guy she didn't know. But then she decided to take charge of the situation. She stopped suddenly and bent down, pretending to tie her shoelaces. The man didn't notice, and just kept going ahead of her. As soon as he was out of sight, Jimin let out a big sigh of relief. "Phew," she whispered to herself. She closed her eyes for a second, like she was saying a silent thank you. Glad that the awkward moment was over. She looked around quickly, making sure no one else was watching, and then straightened her clothes like nothing had happened. She couldn't help but feel a little bad for thinking the worst about him at first. "Sorry, I thought you were up to no good," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head with a smile. Jimin smiled, feeling determined as she hurried home with a bunch of assignments weighing on her mind. Even if she ran, time seemed too short. There was also that final exam to study for. She hoped she remembered the chapters covered. The thought of studying all night made her shoulders droop. But then, turning a corner, she faced a man with wild eyes and a knife. He spoke of other women who died there, leaving Jimin frozen in fear. She couldn't scream even if she wanted to. The man pulled off his white mask, revealing his face, and gave her a creepy grin. "Come with me," he said. The only witness was a flickering street lamp nearby. Jimin tried to speak, but her voice shook. "Oh, shab," she stammered. She wanted to step back, but her legs felt heavy, like they were stuck in place. All she could do was cry. The serial killer looked around carefully. The girl was way too scared to run away, so he thought he'd just kill her right there. Luckily for him, no one else was around, and he didn't think the alley had any cameras. "That's why I love this neighborhood," he thought to himself with a creepy smile. He raised his knife, ready to stab Jimin in the stomach. But just as he did, a hand popped out of nowhere and grabbed the weapon. "What the?" he muttered, turning to see a strong man standing there. Whoa, things just took a weird turn. The man's hoodie was up, casting shadows over his face except for his chin. Was he wearing gloves? He held the knife by its sharp edge, but there was no blood anywhere. "Who are you?" someone demanded. He pulled on the knife again and again, but it wouldn't budge. It was totally stuck. Something wasn't right here. He decided to let it go and took off running. What a freak, he muttered under his breath. He kept glancing back over his shoulder. To his surprise, the strange man was still following him, eyes scanning the area. What the hell? The killer quickly changed direction, leading him toward an empty lot where he'd planned to take his victim. If the guy was wearing gloves or something to protect his hands, the killer needed to aim somewhere else. As they got closer, the killer slowed down, letting the person in the hood catch up. Just as the hooded figure stepped right behind him, the killer spun around with a shiny ice pick and stabbed him straight in the chest. "Get off my back," the killer shouted angrily. "Were you looking down on me, Gershin?" The killer's hand tightened around the pickaxe handle, his fingers trembling like leaves in the wind. Why was Jin-Woo's chest so solid? Was he wearing some kind of armor under his clothes? Or was there something else hidden beneath? The serial killer spat out a curse. "What the hell? You got something under your shirt." If he could sense mana, he wouldn't have asked such a pointless question. But even after failing to land his attacks, it still hadn't occurred to him that Jin-Woo might be a hunter. A low, steady voice came from beneath Jin-Woo's hood. "I'm curious about something." It was Jin-Woo speaking. He tossed the knife he'd taken earlier aside. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why, you're really going to lecture me? I'm just wondering if there's some reason behind this." Atsara the serial killer sneered at Jin-Woo, who had shown up out of nowhere and kept following him even after rescuing the woman. At first he thought Jin-Woo was trying to act like some kind of hero. But this guy had to be crazy, right? Maybe Jin-Woo was as messed up as he was. Maybe he could change how things ended if he could talk the other guy into it. "Why?" the man asked. "Well, if I really had to say why, it's because it's fun." "Fun?" The other man sounded confused. "It's weird, but when I see people weaker than me, I just want to." He didn't get to finish. A loud scream cut him off. He dropped to the ground, clutching his left ankle, which had twisted at an awkward angle. Suddenly Jin-Woo was holding the kitchen knife again. How did he even have time to grab it? Before anyone could figure that out, Jin-Woo vanished once more. This time, the killer's right ankle took the hit. He rolled around on the ground, screaming in pain because both of his tendons were cut, leaving him unable to move. Jin-Woo dug through the killer's pockets and found a wallet and phone. The killer yelled angrily, but Jin-Woo tuned him out. He called an ambulance and checked the ID in the wallet before stuffing everything back into the shaking man's hands. "You'd better turn yourself in by midnight tomorrow, if you want to stay alive," Jin-Woo said firmly. With that, he turned and left, his mission done. Jin-Woo sent one of his shadow soldiers into the serial killer's shadow and gave him the same orders. I don't know how patient High Orc shadow soldiers are, but High Orcs aren't exactly known for their patience. Still, the second set of instructions played right into their strengths. "Honestly, I hope you make it through," Jin-Woo said. He wanted the killer to stay alive, so he could think about his crimes for years to come. "Seriously? Who are you?" the serial killer stuttered, clearly freaked out. Meanwhile, Jin-Woo casually walked away from the park, leaving the trembling, terrified man behind him. As he walked away from the scene, Jin-Woo could faintly hear an ambulance siren in the distance. Once he was a good distance away, he checked around to make sure no one else was nearby before lowering his hood. Man, that was close. He sighed in relief. He had arrived just in time, thanks to the shadow soldier, who had tracked down the serial killer and alerted him. The shadow exchange ability was super handy. Jin-Woo thought to himself. It must be a high-level skill from a powerful runestone. Every time he used it, it worked perfectly without any issues. He couldn't even imagine how much more useful it would become if he could level it up further and reduce the cooldown time. Later, on his way home, Jin-Woo glanced up at the sky and noticed the moon was high overhead. Wait a minute. Wasn't the mission with the Korea-Japan alliance supposed to happen tomorrow? Yeah, that's right. It was almost time for them to put their plan into action. Jin-Woo wasn't part of the team, but his heart was pounding. He wondered how the actual raid members were feeling. He thought about the top hunters he knew, and hoped they'd come back safely. Late at night, Ryuji was in the training hall of the Hunters Association. Ryuji was surrounded, 2 S-rank hunters in front of him, and 1 behind. He took a deep breath, opened his eyes, and shouted. Yeah, the 3 hunters had been waiting for their chance to attack, and now they charged at him with all their might. But then, all 3 of them hit the ground hard. Good job, one hunter said, brushing themselves off. Great work, Mr. Goto, another added. We're no match for you, the third admitted, as they stood back up. Something they could only do. because Ryuji had held back. Ryuji nodded silently to thank them. Like I thought, he thought to himself, I'm in good form. If he had to judge his own performance, he'd say he was in perfect condition. He felt a rush of excitement every time he thought about conquering Korea. But why was he hesitating? After everyone else left, Ryuji sat there, deep in thought, remembering that one particular day, Jin-Woo sung Just Who Was This Guy? The more Ryuji thought about him, the more it left a bad taste in his mouth. He shook his head, trying to clear his mind. Whatever. Jin-Woo wasn't going to be part of the raid anyway, and President Matsumoto's plan would move forward without any hiccups. When Korea lost all their top S-rank hunters in this mission, they'd have no choice but to let Japan take charge. Right now, the Japanese were upset and wanted Korea to pay up, but by then, they'd be celebrating. When the big moment came, what could Jin-Woo-sung really do, on his own? No matter how strong he actually was or whether Ryuji had messed things up, one thing worked out for Japan: Jin-Woo wouldn't be joining tomorrow's raid. It meant no trouble would come their way. Everything depended on tomorrow. Ryuji stood quietly in the empty gym, lit only by the moon, and smiled to himself. Thank you so much for doing this, the executive director of the broadcasting company said, bowing deeply and quickly to the cameraman. It was a strange situation. Usually things wouldn't go this way, but the man in front of him wasn't just any cameraman. He was a licensed A-rank hunter. Everything is riding on this for our network, he said. The company had spent half its annual budget just to get the broadcasting rights because there were so many competitors. But they didn't make this big move without a good reason. Only a few S-rank gates opened worldwide. And even when one did appear, it was impossible to bring recording equipment inside to film. This was the one and only chance for regular folks to see an S-rank raid, unless another dungeon disaster happened somewhere else soon. And guess what? The whole thing was going to be live-streamed with just a 10-minute delay. Can you imagine how many people would tune in? It could easily hit a whopping 70% viewership. This broadcast was going to be a huge deal, and everyone would be glued to their screens wondering what would happen next. Sure, here's a rewritten version of your text, $80. It was a smart move since they made way more from selling foreign rights alone. But if the raid goes south, no one wants to watch their top hunters get chomped by magic beasts. The broadcasting company definitely wouldn't air that mess. The director was all in on this fourth mission, so bending down for the cameraman who'd capture it all didn't hurt his pride much. If the guy had asked, he'd have happily dropped to his knees. Don't stress too much, boss, the cameraman said with a grin, calming him down. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks. The camera used to be his main way of making money before he became a hunter, and after taking this job he had done his homework thoroughly. He had no intention of messing up the experience for his fellow Koreans watching. Plus he was going to get a big payout from it. He couldn't believe he was earning extra money from the broadcast royalties. As an A-rank hunter, he already made a good living, but this amount was enough to keep him fired up and ready for whatever came next. Plus, if everything worked out as he hoped, he could become just as famous and wealthy as the top S-rank hunters on this mission.
He'd be the most well-known A-rank hunter in Korea.
The cameraman noticed his far-off smile and asked curiously,
Hey, how did you manage to get President Go to okay filming this?
I bet it wasn't just about the money, since he's such a stickler for the rules. The director nodded thoughtfully.